There can be no doubt that comic book movies have taken the world by storm, ushering in a second renaissance in the geek culture community. These films have cultivated a new generation of readers driven by the desire to learn about heroes and villains, whom they've only discovered for the very first time. While films like Man of Steel, Captain America, and The Dark Knight have been a major driving force in this comic book resurgence, their success, like almost all forms of innovation, did not originate with want, but instead, with necessity. Winding back to 1970, in the years following the introductions of Superman in 1938 and Batman in 1939, the process of buying and selling comic books was regional. A young man in possession of DC Showcase No. 4 was forced to rely on the honesty and integrity of his local comic book shop to fetch a fair price for the Flash Barry Allen's first appearance. However, in 1970, Robert M. Overstreet, who had long since been a fan of comics, launched the Overstreet Price Guide, which analyzed the value of comic books, taking into account their condition and demand on the national level. Armed with this information, comic book owners had a recourse to shop owners who attempted to lowball the value of these comics. And while the Overstreet Price Guide did even the playing field, it also set in motion the near complete and total collapse of the comic book industry. While some looked to trade their comics in the game of give and take, others looked to the value that rare comics would have in the future. Brave and the Bold No. 28, Amazing Fantasy No. 15, and All-American Comics No. 16 are just some of the publications whose value was noticed by investors around the country. Looking to purchase these and new comics of significance with the expectation that their value would increase over time, the comic book collecting community expanded at an exponential rate as everyone looked to cash in. However, because comic book distributors simply reported the number of comics sold regarding single issues, the fact that individuals were purchasing more than one of the same comic was not taken into account by companies like Marvel and DC. As a result, the increased purchase of comics led to an artificial inflation of the market as publishers simply saw a high rate of purchase. Following this path to its most logical conclusion, comic book publishers began to flood the market with titles, sometimes with as many as 14 individual variant covers, and with the laws of supply and demand being invoked, these comics, once thought to be worth a fortune, suddenly became almost worthless. Fast forwarding to the mid-1990s, stories like the death of Superman, Spider-Man Clone Saga, and Batman Nightfall spelled doom for publishers as collectors began to drop off. What was originally a thriving market of comic book stores and titles was now a laboring beast, gasping for breath. Having spent the last decade attempting to license out their titles to movie studios in the hopes of expanding its brand, the now defunct Marvel Productions stood as a relic of the past, whose only success came in a handful of live-action TV shows and animated series. Forced to declare bankruptcy in 1996 while immersed in a mountain of debt, under the direction of Avi Arad, and after observing the landscape of comic book-related movies and noticing that Superman's run was effectively over, with Batman being the only recent successful film based on a comic, Marvel auctioned off the film rights to the X-Men, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, and others in a bid to stay afloat. While this financial shakeup was taking place at Marvel, Chantix Incorporated, a Canadian-based family-owned toy company, had merged with Random Marketing Incorporated, rebranding itself as Charon Industries and becoming the leading Canadian toy and marketing company of the time. Selling off its toy subsidiary to Isaac Perlmutter in 1990, Charon Toy was rebranded as Toy Biz and allied itself with Marvel Comics to begin the production of Marvel-based toys in place of Mattel. Serving as something akin to a financial backer in the time leading up to Marvel's 1996 bankruptcy filing, under the oversight of Toy Biz CEO Avi Arad, Marvel was restructured from the ground up. Leading to the formation of Marvel Studios, instead of producing their own films, at the outset, Marvel Studios would operate as a packaging house, providing screenplays, directors, and casting for actors in lead roles, with the intention of licensing their rights and packages to various production studios as a means to regain financial solvency. Where Marvel and Toy Biz looked to the future, in the wake of its bankruptcy filing, Marvel was forced to scrap their projects. With Avi Arad serving as the go-between for the selling of Marvel's film rights, the first deal came with Blade, which had been sold to New Line Cinema. To Marvel's surprise, Blade was a financial success, bringing in over $130 million worldwide. But because of the wording and the licensing deal, Marvel's cut of the profits was only $25,000. Seeing the success of Blade, 20th Century Fox, who had purchased the film rights to the X-Men and Fantastic Four, set about making their own film. Hiring Bryan Singer to direct and assembling an all-star cast, X-Men was a massive success, setting the record for a comic book-based film with an opening weekend of more than $54 million, eventually grossing over $293 million worldwide. With Sony's Spider-Man achieving even greater success in 2002 with a $100 million opening weekend, despite these accolades and financial achievements, because the terms of the film rights between Marvel, Fox, and Sony had been negotiated using a flat fee, Marvel's take from the financial success of these films was absolutely nothing. During this time, and in 2003, Avi Arad had introduced Isaac Perlmutter to David Meisel, who at the time operated as the corporate strategist and business development head for Endeavor Talent Agency. Looking to the idea that Marvel could produce their own films, thus giving them total creative control and a possible financial windfall if the films were successful, Meisel arranged for proof of concept by initiating a series of animated feature films produced through Marvel's animation studio and distributed by Lionsgate. While not the most successful of products, the efforts of Meisel caught the attention of Perlmutter, who tasked Meisel to come up with a plan that would allow Marvel to launch their own production studio. Acquiring capital through the wealth management firm Merrill Lynch, with Marvel being 10 years out from their bankruptcy filing, the price of support from Merrill Lynch was high. Requiring collateral in exchange for a $525 million loan, Marvel was forced to put up 10 of their properties, with the stipulation being that if the loan went into default, Marvel would lose the rights to Captain America, the Avengers, Nick Fury, Black Panther, Ant-Man, Cloak and Dagger, Doctor Strange, Hawkeye, Power Pack, and Shang-Chi. Recognizing that the terms of their loan, along with the uncertain length and popularity of superhero movies meant do or die, Marvel was effectively going for broke. This combined with the departure of Avi Arad in 2006 owing to his dislike of taking on debt so soon after bankruptcy, as well as the inability to use their most popular characters and teams in film form, left Marvel in a state of panic as the company searched frantically for a viable property. Or some will say that Marvel experienced a stroke of luck, while others might argue fate, the fact remains that the success of Marvel Studios would come down to one man who would personify the adage that fortune favors the bold. A graduate from the University of Southern California School of Art, Kevin Feige was the grandson of Robert E. Short, an executive for Procter & Gamble's company-owned soap opera, As the World Turns. Credited with being an assistant to film producer Laura Schuler Donner on projects including Volcano and You've Got Mail, with Fox intending to launch their film in 2000, and Donner acting as a producer, Feige's research into the Marvel Universe revealed a rich tapestry of interwoven stories involving the X-Men and Avengers, as well as a multitude of other heroes and villains. In a 2014 article by Devin Leonard of Bloomberg titled How Kevin Feige Became One of the Most Powerful Producers in Hollywood, Feige admitted to immersing himself in Marvel in an attempt to better assist Donner through her actions as producer. Seeing the X-Men as a grounded team whose core charter reflected societal struggles against oppression, Feige's creative input is seen in the X-Men film's narrative of good versus evil and Xavier's pursuit of a peaceful coexistence between humans and mutants. Catching the attention of Avi Arad prior to his departure, and with Isaac Perlmutter's Toy Biz backing the now rebranded Marvel Entertainment, Feige was hired by Arad and worked as the head of creative input regarding the production of further movies based on Marvel titles. Expanding his input to X-Men 2, as well as Sony's Spider-Man, Feige established himself as the foremost authority on Marvel's comic book-related material in the eyes of Hollywood's film producers. However, in Feige's own eyes, where Spider-Man, X-Men, and X-Men 2 proved to be cash cows, these studios were missing a key component necessary to ensure the success of their franchise for the long term. In the mind of Feige, comic book films saw success through the suspension of disbelief and the draw of imagination. However, as these films lingered on and their number grew, it was inevitable that viewership would fluctuate as moviegoers began to step into new aspects of their lives and left the films behind. To that end, Feige believed that if comic book films were going to last any real measure of time, these production studios had to tap into and gain the support of the hardcore fan base in an effort to ensure that their films were received in a positive light and maintained healthy profit margins. Wrapping back around to 2006 following Avi Arad's departure and Marvel's intention to initiate their own line of films, fate seemed to smile on Feige, as his rise in standing within Marvel Studios coincided with the return of the film rights for Iron Man, Thor, and Black Widow. With Iron Man experiencing unprecedented popularity among comic readers following the critically acclaimed story Civil War, to Feige and the creative circle of Joe Quesada, Brian Michael Bendis, and others, if Marvel Studios were to launch a feature film, Iron Man was the best choice considering their lineup. Truth to tell, Marvel Studios took more than a little risk with their approach to Iron Man. Jon Favreau, whose acting and director work was largely composed of comedies, was appointed to the position of director. Having worked with Avi Arad on 2003's Daredevil, during Iron Man's planning phase, Favreau pitched the idea to make Tony Stark more complex, as well as updating his origin story to see his capture taking place in Afghanistan instead of Vietnam. Turning their attention to casting the leading role, both Marvel and Favreau understood the weight of their choice. If the leading actor for Iron Man failed to resonate with fans, the film would tank, along with Marvel's hopes of a continued franchise. However, if the film succeeded, Marvel would wave the flag of victory and usher in a new type of comic book superhero genre. Faced with these facts, while Marvel initiated a series of casting calls for potential actors, to Jon Favreau, there was only ever one actor capable of becoming Tony Stark. Speaking to the Dallas radio station 100.3 Jack FM in 2014, Favreau stated that in his mind, with Tony Stark being a character whose past was mired in alcoholism and the pressures of superhero life, the actor for the leading role needed to come from a place that allowed them to draw on similar experiences. Having recently emerged from his own experiences and attempting to find work in Hollywood, Robert Downey Jr. stood as Favreau's first and only choice. Rejected at every turn by Marvel, who believed that Robert Downey Jr. was too large of a risk, Favreau looked to Downey's work following his return to Hollywood, which included Gothica, as well as a number of semi-independent films, like A Guide to Recognizing Your Saints, Good Night and Good Luck, as well as Zodiac. In a 2008 interview with The List, a magazine dedicated to arts and entertainment in the United Kingdom, Favreau had stated that during the casting process, his argument to Marvel was that Downey's own experiences mirrored those of Tony Stark. Succeeding in making his case, Iron Man was released in May of 2008, opening at #1 in the box office. Critics and fans hailed Robert Downey Jr.'s performance, considering him to be the highlight of the film. Indeed, for the hardcore fans of Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. and Tony Stark seemed one and the same, as Downey was able to draw on his own personal struggles with success and failure. Achieving a gross of nearly $100 million in May of 2008, by the end of its theatrical run, Iron Man had garnered over $500 million in revenue. Moreover, Marvel Studios stood on the success of their film, and under the direction of Kevin Feige, looked to the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.